So hello everyone and welcome to PMP Live. My name is Leah and I'm a bookseller at Politics and Prose, and I truly have the honor of being your host this evening. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning in this virtual format, which allows us to continue to bring these amazing authors and their beautiful words and worlds to readers like you. And it is no exception with our guests this evening. And I'm so excited to welcome our very special guest, Emily X.R. Pan. Welcome. Along with Sabaa Tahir, as we celebrate the release of Emily's much anticipated new novel, An Arrow to the Moon. Look at this gorgeous book. Yes. So excited for friends to get to read this. But before we begin this discussion, just a few notes. If you would like to have closed captioning for this event, please look at the bottom of your screen and click on the live transcripts button and then select show subtitle. You can click on the link at the bottom of our chat to purchase additional copies or get them for friends of Emily's new book, An Arrow to the Moon, which will include some beautiful art cards and a pin while supplies last. They're so beautiful. And also check out Sabaa's epic, amazing books, especially very impactful newest one, All My Rage. Gorgeous. If you ever read it, must. Yes. Also, if you have a question for our guest this evening, you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one down there. And at the end of our chat, our guests will have time to answer some of your questions. You can also vote on questions you really want answered by clicking the thumbs up button. And as always, please remember that this is a creative safe space, and we ask that friends be respectful of one another in their questions and comments. And now, enough of that, it's on to the event you're all waiting for. It is my honor to introduce amazing author and educator, Emily X.R. Pan. While she currently lives in Brooklyn, Emily was originally born in Midwestern US to immigrant parents from Taiwan. Emily is the New York Times and National Indie bestselling author of the stunningly beautiful novel, The Astonishing Color of After, which was the winner of the Walter Award, the APALA Honor Award, and long listed for the Carnegie Mellon, and the accolades keep going. She's also the co-editor of the anthology Foreshadow, Stories to Celebrate Magic of Reading and Writing YA, which was a collection born out of an initiative to spotlight underrepresented voices and new writers while highlighting the beauty and power of YA fiction. She is also the founding editor-in-chief of Bodega Magazine, and it's no surprise that she's a passionate teacher of creative writing. Emily has taught at various institutions, including NYU, the New School, and the 92nd Street Y. She's received her MFA in fiction from NYU, where she was the Goldwater Fellow and editor-in-chief of Washington Square Review. And of course, tonight we are celebrating the release of her beautiful new novel, An Arrow to the Moon, which is a gorgeous blend of a mythology and speculative fiction. This novel weaves an amazing tale of epic love, tangled bonds of family, and the power of storytelling. And tonight, Emily is joined by fellow fabulous YA author, Sabaa Tahir. Yay! Sabaa is the best-selling author of the epic Ember in the Ashes series, which, might I say, that she began writing as a newspaper editor at Washington Post here. And recently, we celebrated the release of her newest novel, All My Rage. And now, enough of that, it's my pleasure to pass it over to Emily and Sabaa. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Leah. Emily, that list of things that you have done and are doing was a little thin. I sort of feel like you probably have a lot of spare time in your hands, tons of time to read and kind of do nothing. No, I'm joking. Obviously, I don't understand how you have time to breathe right now.
What is sleep? What is breathing?
What is sleep? And yet you managed to somehow, during all these incredible things, manage to write this beautiful book, An Arrow to the Moon. Will you tell us a little bit about this story for people who are unfamiliar with it, and specifically how the idea came to you?
Yeah, so An Arrow to the Moon is my Romeo and Juliet and Chinese mythology mashup. It's specifically a retelling of Hou and Chang, the divine archer and the goddess of the moon. And I was raised on these stories. As I was growing up, I would oftentimes hear my dad tell me about Hou, about Chang, about various other figures, but those two were the ones who were my favorite. And I knew that I wanted to do some type of some Emily iteration of that tale. Growing up, I always loved mythology. I had so many different compilations of world mythology, and I would go looking for the myths that I had heard from my parents, and I at best, there would be like one sentence or a paragraph about them, and then nothing else. Most of the time, there was no mention of them. It would be world mythology, but the focus would be on like Norse gods, Greek gods, and I always felt a little bit sad, like, why do people not care about Hou and Chang'e? And so I knew that I wanted to capture them somehow. I also knew that I wanted to write some type of Romeo and Juliet thing, but modernized, more feminist. In Shakespeare's play, Romeo is really whiny and Juliet is immature and lacks agency. Things just kind of happen to her. And while I love Romeo and Juliet, every time I reread it or rewatch it, I'm still annoyed by that all over again. So I wanted to write a version of Romeo and Juliet where I felt like I actually had respect for the characters and they actually have agency and their motives are more understandable than just lust at first sight.
Right.
So
right.
I wanted to mash the two together, and it occurred to me that both of these are star-crossed, doomed love stories, and it would just become this perfect sandbox for me to craft this aggressively Asian American story.
Right, right. And you did so really beautifully. And I completely agree with your assessment of Romeo. I've always been like, stop whining. And guys, just so you know, we will have a Q&A at the end of the conversation. So please put your questions in the Q&A, and we promise that we will try to get to as many as we can. They can be about whatever. Okay, so you wrote this story from multiple points of view. As a fellow multiple POV author myself, I know how difficult that can be. What I thought was really cool about how you did it is you had both, young adults and adults actually, and some very interesting other perspectives as well. So I'm wondering, like, was that difficult? Did you have a favorite or a least favorite?
I did not think I was writing a multi-POV book going in. I thought it was just going to be Hunter and Luna, like two POVs cutting back and forth. And I realized that I wanted to have these families be crumbling. I wanted Hunter and Luna to resent their families the way Romeo and Juliet resent their families. But I didn't want the parents to be totally villainized. I wanted you to be able to empathize with them and have sympathy for them and understand some of the really hard decisions that they make. And so it organically became necessary for me to include the parents so that you could get that other angle. And it's a little bit more heartbreaking, I think, when you can see it from both sides. Yeah. My favorite perspective to write was actually Rodney Wong, which might be surprising to some people because he doesn't get that much screen time. He's a side character, an antagonist, but I did so much research in order to craft his backstory and his personality that I became very attached to him.
That's interesting. I love Rodney Wong. I mean, I loved his story and I thought it was really fascinating. I kind of hated him too, but I also really appreciated from a crafts perspective, just how well crafted he was. So good job.
Thanks.
You kind of mentioned earlier when we were talking about having heard your parents share these stories with you, as immigrant kids, I feel like we have this kind of unusual connection with the myths of our homeland where it's like we're both insiders and outsiders to these stories, right? So I'm curious, do you feel any trepidation when approaching the mythology that you referenced in your book, or was it just exciting? Were you worried at all? Like, hey, how am I gonna do this?
Yeah, a little bit. I was worried in that I didn't want to do a retelling where it was set in some East Asian landscape as some type of second world fantasy that is trying to feel exotic or anything. I didn't want to, that felt uninteresting to me and also outside of what I was trying to explore. Right. So when I gave myself permission to totally bastardize it and ground it in the experience of Asian American diaspora, that opened up a lot of different creative channels for me. So I was able to, give myself a little bit more permission to play with it, and also feel less nervous about readers who might be like, but wait, that's such a weird interpretation of the
Sure.
myth. I mean,
Right.
I hope people find it to be refreshing and unexpected, because I do kind of twist and turn it on its head. But it was the type of thing where I read many versions of the myth, because there are a lot of iterations out there that are all slightly different. Like in some of them, Chang is greedy, and so that's how the ending comes about. And in others, Chang is just like silly and kind of dismissed as like a little girl who doesn't know anything. And that always made me really angry. I wanted the girl to have more power and agency and be more important than that. So I think that's like as specific as I can get without spoiling ending.
Yeah. No worries. I think that was a great answer. You know, you have these two characters. You have Hunter and you have Luna. And I'm also going to try to be careful that I don't spoil, but they are these sort of star-crossed, lovers to some degree, and their families have this old grudge. And I found it really, really interesting that the parents were so deeply set in their opinions. I think that's something a lot of immigrant kids can relate to. And so I'm curious, what do you say to young readers who find that they have sort of wildly varying perspectives from their parents, and who feel like maybe their paths are diverging from their parents and what their parents' wishes are? Because that's something I think that's really common in our communities.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's this matter of being able to honor your own feelings and trying to understand why your family members might have different perspectives from you. Trying to be, trying to hold space for both, because, I think it's a very non-immigrant perspective to be like, well, if you just can't see eye to eye, then you just cut off those family members, or you cut off those members of your community. And that is a lot harder for immigrant children, in part because our families, I think, are so tightly knit as like a survival tactic in a lot of ways. A lot of the time it's also cultural, the ways and the expectations that we're raised with. And I think it becomes this situation of being able to compartmentalize and be like, yes, this is how my family thinks about this, and I don't think the same way, but I can honor both.
Right. Yeah, no, well said. I agree with that. And to the audience here, we are going to be doing audience Q&A in probably about 15, 20 minutes or so. So please add your questions to the Q&A so that we can ask Emily all the thoughts in her brain. So one of the things that struck me is when I first opened the book, and I saw that you dedicated the book to yourself. And it seems like writing this was quite a journey. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about that.
It was a journey, to say the least. It was so difficult because it was my first time writing a book entirely under contract. So my debut novel, Astonishing, I had written and rewritten over the course of many years, and then got my agent with it, tinkered with it, sold it to my editor, tinkered with it, and then it came out. And An Arrow to the Moon, it was just the second book in my contract, which in the contract is just untitled work, and I had to conceptualize it when it had already been purchased. And I had to cross my fingers and hope that my publishing team would like it, that they would want to support it. And then after I sold them the idea, I had to execute it. And that's so strange and so inorganic for me, because when I'm writing, I'm figuring out what story I'm telling myself for the first several drafts. So it feels very weird to be like, here's the story idea I'm going to tell, and then somehow fill that space.
Right.
So that, that was messing with my mind a little bit. And then there was also just the imposter syndrome of, am I even a real author if I can't do the book a year schedule or whatever? Like, there's always that pressure, I think, especially in young adult publishing. And then also on the heels of Astonishing, which was so much more successful than I could ever have dreamed of, feeling this pressure, like, how am I supposed to follow up? What if readers are disappointed? And it was a long period of me fighting against all that noise before I finally was able to start to shut it out and just listen to myself. And I didn't want to write a book that was similar to Astonishing. It would be boring to me to write the same type of book again and again. I wanted it to be very different.
Yeah, no, I think that the writing under contract is something I can really relate to, like how difficult that can be, because this is supposed to be a very creative experience, but there's something about that kind of can constrain a creativity a little bit. So I feel that. So in terms of the book itself and the time period that you set it in, you decided to set it in the past. You set it in 1991 to be specific, and I don't think that's a spoiler. Hopefully no one feels that that's a spoiler. I am wondering why you chose that time period. I thought it was kind of interesting. Just it seemed it was really pitch perfect for like what you were doing, like the way that it turned out. And I'm just wondering where that time period came from.
So there are two reasons for it. One is logistically the way that I wanted to tie into moments of history that I'm kind of bastardizing. It made it line up so that 1991 would be when Hunter and Luna were born. But I also very much wanted to explore the isolation that I felt as a kid, especially when I was living in the Midwest and I was in a completely white community. I was, you know, the only Asian at school, and I felt very much separated from everybody. I felt not just separate, but like actively separated, because kids
like othered.
Yeah, exactly, othered, because kids didn't understand how to behave around somebody who didn't look like them. And I think that isolation, especially for this story, I wanted it to feel a little bit timeless, even though I explicitly tell you it's 1991. I wanted it to have that timeless feeling, and I didn't want there to be technology the way it currently exists, because that, even though it's still totally possible and common to feel isolation with all the social media and all the ways that we have of quote unquote connecting these days. Even though that's the case, there's just something about growing up in the middle of, you know, a white dominant community where everybody around you has expectations of you that you don't want them to have. And you can only connect with people when you meet them face to face and discover that you're experiencing the same things.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I also grew up in a really isolated, I mean, it wasn't necessarily like a Midwestern community, but it was a very isolated community in the California desert. So I really relate to that. There were a few more, I think, people of color than maybe it was in your community, but not by much. It was like there was a very small little contingent of us. So I felt that when I was reading the book, and you know, you were sort of describing this town, and you're describing particularly how the people from Hunter and Luna's immigrant group sort of gather, you know, and they kind of all know each other. You know, that was something that was really familiar to me. So I thought that was interesting. So, you know, you have talked a little bit about some of the personal relevance and the connection that you have to the story. I think a lot of readers think that when we write a story that has, you know, a personal connection, we don't really do any research on it. But it seemed like you did a fair bit of research for this book, just in terms of how beautifully crafted it was and how much detail there was. And I was wondering if you could tell us about what that process was like.
Research is almost the foundation of all my writing. It's how I get inspired for different scenes. I'm guilty of spending 5 hours down a black hole trying to find one specific obscure term for a shipping vessel from the 70s from East Asia, only to then delete, to write one word in one sentence that gets deleted like 3 drafts later. Which sounds torturous and maybe sounds like a waste of time, but it's not at all a waste of time for me, because it's time where I'm immersed in that period, you know, that era, that experience. And I almost always get new book ideas while I'm researching. Most of my like subsequent projects have come out of the research I was doing for a previous story. And so I definitely fell down many black holes researching everything from the terracotta warriors to the Chinese mafia to, you know, how a township would react to everything in town suddenly cracking apart and breaking. And it just, for me, that specificity is what makes a story come to life.
Right.
And so no matter how small the detail, I felt like I just needed to spend a little bit more time with everything. Like I watched so many YouTube videos of rabbits eating, even though there's maybe one mention of the rabbit eating.
Yeah. No, it is really important. You know, I ended up, so there's a drug dealer in All My Rage, and I ended up being like, how do I research this? So, you know, ultimately I had to sort of dig around and be like, okay, who are my friends who like might be able to help me with, you know, it was not, I couldn't really find much on the internet because most people aren't like gonna put up their, you know, so I ended up talking to like both kind of sides on it, both like the side that does that, but also like a few police officers and sort of their views on like kind of what's happening and what the trends are and stuff. And it took way more research than I thought. And then I actually ended up cutting a lot of that stuff out. So I feel
but
that
it lends itself to the authenticity because
it does.
in your book, you can really feel it.
Like, right. So, and that is, it's the same with yours. It actually struck me as I was reading. It was like, wow, this is really like well researched. So, good job.
Thanks.
So, I'm going to talk about a personal favorite of mine. So I loved the character of Cody. Specifically, he said this one thing at one point that he didn't want to shout as he got older. And I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about how you created this character and what he meant to you.
I, first of all, always aspire to write soft boys in my stories because I think that there are too many stories out there where boys are not allowed to be soft or they're not allowed to present softly. And so I wanted to make Cody, you know, just the softest little cinnamon roll of them all. And I wanted him to kind of embody that that experience of feeling so trapped and helpless and frustrated about it and unable to do anything about it, and knowing that one of the most direct ways that you can counter life experiences when they're so difficult is to determine how you're going to move forward as your own person.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, I thought that character was just beautiful. I loved him all the way from like the beginning all the way until the very end. I was like super invested like what was happening with Cody. So without spoiling anything, I'm really curious. Did you know the ending of the book before you started it? It was so like pitch perfect. I was like, she had to have known. So, but I did. Wondering. You did.
It was one of the key images in my head as I started writing. It was one of the only plot points that I was certain of from the moment I began writing the book. And I spent so much of the book in a panic, wondering if I would be able to earn the ending, whether readers would get there and actually follow me with the ending. I had many conversations with my agent where, you know, at one point he was like, yeah, you need readers to finish the book and be like, what the F? And not be like, what the F?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think that's a hilarious way of looking at it. But I definitely finished the book and I was like, okay, my world has been rocked. So well done. I think it's a beautiful ending, and I'm excited for all of these readers here tonight who are going to get a chance to read the book for the first time. I'm a little jealous of them. So I'd love to turn, we have just a few minutes left before we're going to turn to audience questions. So again, guys, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and I will address those, or I will ask Emily those questions. But I'd love to turn to, you know, this idea of craft in case we have writers in the audience. So I'm curious, like you've talked a little bit about sort of how the idea came to you, but what was the actual writing process for this book? Like, was it all at once? Was it halting? You know, did you struggle at all in the process of writing it?
Oh, it was such a struggle. I am a chronic rewriter. As I mentioned before, I figure out what the story is as I'm writing it. So I'm telling the story to myself, but that means that I take a lot of, wrong turns in my drafts. And then when I am doing the next draft, I go through and I fix those turns, but I also usually realize, oh, actually, I want to go in this direction instead. And so the final draft of this, the final manuscript that like went off to copy edits was draft 26.2.
Wow.
And my numbering system is such that the decimal places are the small, maybe cosmetic changes, like, oh, I'm going to change my spelling convention for all the Chinese in the book. And then the whole number changes are where I'm changing something plot wise, where I'm completely tearing out something and rebraiding it. So it was very much a struggle. There were so many moments when I thought, I genuinely was like, maybe I just need to give back the money. Like, maybe I just can't write this book.
Oh no, I've been there. I know that feeling.
Where I was like, what, how did anybody believe that I could write this book? And I think it's so important that we all acknowledge that that is a very real part of the process, that you feel that no matter how many books you've written, no matter how much success you might have had, there's always that moment of doubt when it doesn't help to have anybody else tell me that they believe I can do it. I have to believe that I can do it. There's this Zadie Smith quote on writing that I really love, where she says, writing is a confidence game. The person you have to trick into confidence is yourself. And I think about that constantly, how I'm conning myself into being excited and into believing that I'm capable of writing the story in order to actually produce it.
No, I completely agree. And I also think that there's so many times where your brain is so tired of convincing yourself you should write it, that at that point, what you just need is like sheer stubbornness. Like you just need to be like, well, I'm finishing it now. So, brain, even if you're going to be irritating and tell me I can't do it, I don't care. I'm doing it, I definitely have gotten to that point in my stories. I'd say every single book I get to that point at the end where it's like, I'm going on sheer stubborn willpower, and that is it. That's all I've got. So I connect with that. So that brings me to my second to last question, which is, what are you working on next?
I'm working on a new young adult novel. I am under contract for it. So again, people believe in me and my ability to write it. And I have to figure out how to trick myself into having the confidence for it. And that's the stage where I'm at. I'm trying to figure out what the process for this book it really is, because I write every book so differently that I spend a lot of time just trying to figure out how the work is even supposed to be done. And and then when I am feeling really stuck or I'm procrastinating, I cheat on that book by writing my adult book.
I do a lot of cheating on my books, like my poor books. I mean, I think the biggest example was Sky. I cheated on Sky with all my rage. I was like, I'm writing this book instead.
God.
So yeah, I feel that. Okay, so last question for you before we turn to audience questions, which is, if readers liked Arrow to the Moon, what would you recommend they read next that's kind of in the same vein?
I think that everything that Anna Marie McLemore writes is...
I was just going to say, I was like, I wonder if she'll say that Anna Marie McLemore.
AM is so amazing at doing the magic baked into the real world, the world around us, and grounding us in that.
It's a skill of theirs. They're amazing at it.
Everything Anna Marie McLemore writes, everything Nova Rensuma writes. I would also say that everyone should read this really brilliant book. That if you love stories about, immigrant families and that feel really epic and sprawling and at the same time just so full of so much depth and so much important questions of identity, you got to read this book. It happens to be by somebody very brilliant.
Somebody who took 15 years to write it, just a little too long. All right. Well, thank you so much for putting up with my questions. Now I'm going to turn to audience questions. So our first question is from Adrienne. Adrienne would like to know, Emily, I'm a huge fan of Astonishing. I love the almost magical realism aspect to it. Is An Arrow to the Moon in a similar vein?
Yeah, although I don't call my stories magical realism because magical realism is a specific genre born out of Latinx communities responding to oppression and colonialism. And so I know it's a mouthful, but I generally call my books contemporary with magical elements. And, you know, Barnes & Noble shelves it as fantasy, so call it whatever. But
sure.
It definitely was an intention of mine that An Arrow to the Moon feel similar in terms of the strangeness of it. And the town that Hunter and Luna live in, Fairbridge, this fictional town, is the same town that Lee, the main character of Astonishing, is from.
Okay, interesting. Oh, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
I love it when there's little connections like that in books. So Taylor Harvey would like to know, regarding sort of the contract untitled work bit that you were talking about, how do you feel looking back at how differently you had to bring An Arrow to the Moon to life, like the differences, I suppose?
It was probably the greatest challenge that I've ever faced creatively. And it's an interesting thing to look back on because I'm fiercely proud of this book. It would have been very easy for me to let a substandard draft out into the world and just be like, I just need to get it out of my brain and be done with it. But whatever goes out into the world, I want it to hold my intention. I want it to be very carefully rendered and representative of what I want to communicate. And so I think it was this situation of learning to really trust myself. And my agent was constantly telling me, you know, you have such a clear vision for your work. You have to just like trust in your vision and believe in yourself, and it's going to become what you want it to be. And that would always come back to me in times when I was feeling very lost, because I'd be like, okay, Michael believes that I have the ability to realize my vision. And it was probably the single-handedly the project that taught me how to trust myself and my creative instincts.
Interesting. That's really wonderful when we get to that point. You know, it's a really special like feeling to sort of hit that point and then know that like, hey, going forward, this is in my toolkit. You know, like my writer toolkit. Like it's really great. So that's wonderful. So Leah Atlee has a question, and you know, she says, if this is too spoilery to answer, I understand. But what made you pick fireflies?
So when I was a kid growing up, I would run, I'm thinking specifically of the years that I spent in Wisconsin, where I would run around the neighborhood with friends and we would trap all sorts of bugs and we would keep them in little, I can't believe it's not butter containers, you know, the plastic tubs, and we would punch holes in them and fill them with grass to try to make some sort of environment that these poor insects could actually survive in. And so, and I remember feeling like there was something so special about that connection. Like I could find this bit of life and I could hold it in my hands. And I could even put it in my tub and carry it home with me and hope that it would survive. And that bit of connection, I think there's something really magical about that sadly doesn't happen so much now because we're all glued to our screens, we're all glued to the internet. But there's something really special about connecting with nature in that way. And I wanted to have that kind of physical way of tethering the magic in the book.
Yeah. Were you ever able to catch fireflies? I never had any luck as a kid.
Oh my God. I've caught so many fireflies. You just have to, although, I mean, there are a lot of different species of fireflies. That was another research wormhole I fell down, that a lot of it got
I can
cut.
imagine that. Yeah. I think it might've been that they weren't as common out in the desert. Like I caught lizards.
Yeah.
that was what we did out in the desert. You got fireflies, I call lizards. So the next question is from Axie. Oh, hello, Axie. Hello, Axie. Congratulations, Emily. I love your comment about playing in the sandbox of your influences. Are there any Easter eggs that you put into the story for readers who might be familiar with your influences, Romeo and Juliet and Chinese mythology?
Oh yeah, there are definitely Easter eggs in there. There are little nods to Romeo and Juliet, the play, and nods to Baz Luhrmann's 1996 film that I
wonderful.
love. And there are also nods to the original mythology that I based the story off of. And then there are also little Easter eggs calling back to Astonishing.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's really fun. I like putting those in my books too. I actually had fun making Ember references in All My Rage, like little ones where I was like trolling my characters. I really enjoyed that.
And I loved the names and the other titles that you put in
that
your characters were reading and whatnot.
Yeah, that was my way of like putting in some of my favorite books. I was like, okay, maybe people will read these. So Heather Hill would like to know, what is the last book or audiobook that you read and loved?
Oh, hilariously, I mean, I'm currently teaching a grad class, and I've been listening to the books that I'm teaching on audiobook to ensure that I can reread them in time. And this week we're doing Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, but that's a reread, so I feel like it doesn't count. But All My Rage, Sabaa's book, was the book that I finished most recently. I was cheating on reading what I had to teach for school with the audio. The audiobook is phenomenal, so highly recommend it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, it's the actors did an incredible job. So, so one that I read recently that I really love is going to be coming out very soon. It's called Hollow Fires, and it's by Samira Ahmed. Hollow Fires is coming out in May. It is incredible. So if you guys have not heard of it or have not pre-ordered it, please get your pre-order. It is an absolutely fabulous book.
I can't wait for that one.
I love it. Yeah, no, it's very, very good. Okay, so another question. This is from Gabiba Weston. I hope I said your name right, Gabiba Weston. I loved your mention of how you approach the story not to please readers, but to end with a product that you are proud of. Was there a moment where you knew you'd reached your vision, or did it come slowly and with some time and space?
It definitely came slowly, but I did reach this moment where I was like, wow, this is exactly what I set out to craft. And that it was a very surreal moment to have that realization, because I've never experienced that with a piece of fiction I've written ever. There's this wonderful Ira Glass quote where he talks about how when you are starting out making stories, your taste is impeccable, but your execution is not so great, and there's this gap, and you're forever trying to bridge the gap, and every time you work at something from start to finish, you're bridging that gap closer and closer. And I felt myself starting to bridge the gap with Astonishing. Like, I remember writing the opening pages of the version that would eventually sell and turning to my partner and being like, I'm bridging the gap, like actually saying that out loud. But An Arrow to the Moon is the first time where I feel like the final product is exactly what I always intended it to be. And that was really special. And I think it came out of that struggle of being able to push out all the external noise, all the expectations, the feeling like I was writing up on a stage with people looking over my shoulder, and just be able to come into the quiet and focus on what I wanted to do.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. So Chloe Pettit has a question. Emily, I loved An Arrow to the Moon so much, and I cried so hard at the end. How did you come up with the beautiful ending, I guess, without spoiling? And what is your favorite part/quote?
Oh, the ending. Well, so I knew I guess when I say ending, like when Sabaa was asking originally about whether I knew the ending I was heading towards, I'm thinking specifically of the big climax, which for people who've read the book, you'll know what I'm talking about. I always knew that was that was going to happen. And then everything that followed it, I suppose the true ending came about very organically in me trying to, I was trying so hard to make every single character sympathetic. So then I had to think back on how do I address each of these characters and their baggage, the stuff that they're dealing with and how they would respond. And then how do I sharpen it and make it maybe a little bit more heartbreaking. I mean, I wasn't setting out to make it super sad. That's just, it wasn't like my goal was like, this is going to be as sad as possible, but
you weren't trying to break everyone's heart. Yeah. Okay. So I now have, so that's it for the audience questions. I have one last question for you that I would like to ask for my own personal and that is, what is your favorite like writing snack? Like, what is your, I'm always so fascinated by this. I know it's a question a lot of writers get, but it's so varied. I've heard everything from like heated up, like microwaved flaming Cheetos, which Renee Attier, once told me, she's like, that's my writing snack, to like, you know, healthier stuff. Like someone once told me that like they love like having like vegetables and ranch. And I was like, wow, I admire the self-control. So what is yours? What is your favorite snack?
I love food so much that I eat like just about like 100 varieties of things that I could be snacking on at any moment. But I almost always end up writing with a seltzer next to me. I think something about the bubbliness of it kind of keeps me like, alert.
Keeps you awake. Yeah.
I
like
that.
Know, I should try that. I will try that.
Yeah.
I will try that. I feel like seltzer goes really well with chocolate, which is my
choice.
I
know you're like the queen of chocolate. But the other thing is that I cannot stand having food on my fingers and then touching my computer. So that makes it a little bit tricky.
Agreed. Yeah. No, I always have to have a wrapper. That's pretty essential. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much, Emily. This has been a wonderful, lovely chat. I think that our friends at Politics and Prose just want to pop back on real quick, so I will let them do that.
And thank you, Sabaa. Thank you for the amazing questions.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I can hear you, listen to you talk forever, but I know you're all so busy, so it's so special to have this time to hear you both speak on this amazing book. But that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for all your questions and contributions. And of course, many thanks to Emily and Sabaa for joining us this evening and sharing your beautiful words and worlds and insights. And of course, thank you all viewers for joining us today and supporting these astounding authors. So I hope you don't forget that you can click on the link in the chat box that we put to grab a copy or two of Emily's beautiful book, An Hour to the Moon. Yay. And don't forget, they'll come with beautiful pins. Thank you so much. And a limited supply of beautiful art cards. These are so beautiful.
They're so pretty. Yes.
Thank you.
And as always, as an independent bookstore, we really appreciate your support as well. So you can find out about more upcoming events by checking our website for updated listings. You can follow our Kids and Prose department on social media, and our handle will be in our chat box. We're at Kids and Prose. And you can watch our events on our YouTube page, like this one. You can watch it again. So I hope to see you there as well. So thanks again. I hope you all keep reading widely, expanding your world, and discovering new ones. And I hope you all stay safe. Evening.
Thank you.
Thank you
all for
Have
coming.
A great evening.
Thank you, Leah.